Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Alan Sousie. I'm Director of Nursing at TLC HomeCare. And with me this morning I have Sharon McCarthy, one of our personal care assistants, who is going to share with us some information that's very interesting information. It's about memory. It's not related directly to the type of memory issues that we typically think of, such as Alzheimer's, dementia, or anything of that nature. It's more pertinent to our spiritual and emotional lives. So Sharon's going to talk with us today about memory as the treasure and guardian of all things. So with that introduction, I turn the floor to Sharon now to share with us her thoughts.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
As Alan said, memory is something very interesting, how it impacts our life and how we perceive things, our perception and perspective on life. So today when we have a topic concerning memory, what comes to mind generally? Alzheimer's, dementia, memory loss, or some type of brain disorder. But there is also the opposite effect that memory can have on us. So the purpose of our discussion today is our memories that we are unaware of, but clearly impact who we are. Our memories have shaped who we are and how we react emotionally to life's events. It shapes our whole view of the world and how we understand our life and others. Some memories we can will to the surface, some create happiness, others sadness. Our perception of anything is created by our past and how we process our memories. There are other types of memories that are involuntary. So here we are not talking about memory loss, but how we retain memory and how it impacts us at different stages of our life and what that means. Negative or positive, good or bad, we are our thoughts. We are what our past has been. We are our experiences. From the time you are very young, every thought, every word, and every action that you see, hear, or observe, every experience is taken in and stored in your memory bank. Whether it is valid, correct, or true, it is your reality. It is also possible that some things were not correct. They were perhaps dysfunctional or traumatic experiences from our family of origin or otherwise, or as we get older from our own choices. Sometimes well-meaning people that we loved or trusted passed on misguided ways of interacting or opinions that shape the way we interpret things in our life, memory. It is how we think, recovery is in changing our thinking, how we view our world, our life, and our past. Perception, the glass half full or half empty analogy. One viewpoint is hopeful, the other is not. Yet it is the same thing. It is how it is looked at and how it is perceived. Studies have been done on depressed patients that measure brain activity and chemistry, and they have found something very interesting using MRIs. There are actually chemicals that are released in our brains according to our thoughts. By observing or listening to something that is pleasurable, or seeing something that is uplifting, there is a physiological change in the brain that releases dopamine and other chemicals that create calming effects. That's very interesting. Opposite of that, the same is true. If you are viewing destructive or violent movies or situations, unconsciously your body and mind are impacted. It is subtle, the body has a response, it is unsettled, makes you nervous, depressed, even if you are unaware of it. Everything is mood altering that we see or hear. We are emotional beings, it is a given. Good thoughts create well-being, negative thoughts create depression. Our thinking can create imbalance in our bodies and our memory, which can then cause anxiety. Now that's not to say there are not in some cases biological or metabolic physical reasons for imbalance and anxiety. However, more often than not, our body will respond to our thinking and how we interpret events in our life. And when we are not under the stress of emotion, our bodies begin to heal. It impacts our immune system. How we look at and remember affects us physically. There's also the physical abuse that your bodies are subjected to from drugs and alcohol. And as soon as you stop using, the body starts to regenerate. This healing takes time. Be patient with your physical, emotional, and spiritual recovery. It takes time to heal all areas of your life. Every day is a new beginning, one day at a time. The fight or flight response. Panic and anxiety attacks are very real and frightening. When we are under the stress of emotion, our bodies are in overdrive. It is what is called the fight or flight response, our natural response to danger. The adrenaline that starts pumping by how we are thinking, it is as if we are in immediate danger. But the body will relax once we start to feel safe. So what does that say? What does that tell us? We have control over the symptoms by how we are viewing what is happening in the moment. But often we are not even aware of our unconscious thoughts. Memories, again, come into play. This is where talking things through to put things into perspective is essential. Our self-talk is very dangerous. We can spiral very quickly if we do not neutralize negative thinking with positive and hopeful. Thinking about the past or a traumatic event over and over without addressing it outwardly with someone that you trust can become a train wreck. I know we've spoken of this before. Memory impacts us always. Once things are addressed appropriately and you are allowed to feel about it in a healthy way, it helps to release the emotional charge by allowing yourself to face it and feel it or grieve it. Then the hold that it has on you will become less so. Eventually it's no longer an issue after we deal with a lot of these memories and these thoughts that we have. Panic or anxiety and fear usually is caused by something that we do not want to face the reality and truth of. There is often ambivalence or conflict at a situation or situations in our life, and it is not always what you may think. For example, the fear of driving, for instance, could be masking other issues. It could represent something more in depth. It is important to get to the bottom of fears and phobias. It can be very revealing and freeing once you work it through and understand the underlying reason, once you understand your unconscious memories. Do not feed fear into fear. It is actually the fear of the anxiety or panic attack that exacerbates the problem. In the moment, deep breathing into the count of 4 and out slowly to the count of 10. Slowing our breathing in the moment helps to calm, and it will pass. When you're in the middle of an anxiety attack, often it helps to just step back and do slow breathing. And President Roosevelt is famous for a speech that he gave where he said that you have nothing to fear but fear itself. How true. Turn the what ifs into so what. What is the worst that can happen if you just go with it and move through it and do not fight it? It will subside. It will pass. The less fear and tensing, the less impact on our body. Stress can deplete vitamins and nutrients, causing imbalance. Often replacing with vitamin therapy is helpful in physically balancing our health. Autosuggestion from ourselves or others, listening to opinions, not knowing your own truth, not knowing our own truth can create panic and anxiety. If we're so absorbed with all these other thoughts and memories that other people have told us about how we should be and how life is, it can really create panic and anxiety. So that's what autosuggestion is. It's not your it's not your truth. It's what others are telling you should be your truth, perhaps. Trauma. Well, be true to yourself. Prayer and meditation is a powerful tool. God will give you guidance, and then you just know that you know. There is a peace in coming to terms with yourself and your situation. Getting in touch with a higher power if one is in that place in their life. And let's talk a little about trauma. Trauma. It's amazing how some people can go through life without so much as a backward glance, no matter what life has brought their way. And then others are so damaged by experience that is almost immobilizing. Again, memory and how we perceive it. There are different degrees as to how we interpret things. Again, depending on our background and what we are exposed to. Re-educating our thinking and the way we view the world and our circumstances. Life is a journey. We can learn, we can rethink, we can reprocess, using the tools that are available to us. Life is a gift, really, if we see it that way. Prayer and 12-step programs, counseling, breathing exercises, healing music, meditation, reading biographies and autobiographies on recovery, stepping into others' experiences can sometimes be very helpful in changing perspective. So in closing, whatever is good and hopeful, whatever is uplifting and gives you strength to see with a different eye, a different mind, and a different heart. When we were born into the world, we were not given the spirit of fear, but of love and of power and of a sound mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Well put.
Thank you.
I have a couple of thoughts.
Okay.
This is in the way of what stimulated me. The idea of getting past memories that are painful. What are some concrete examples that you can give from either your own personal life or from your experience working with people that have been in pain to help listeners have some ideas for concrete things they can actually do? What you alluded to a few here, but can you really give us some tangible examples?
Well, as I said, it's all perspective. So I think it's very important to get out of the negative thinking and look at the other side of where the positives are. And so once we do that, once we start to see things, sometimes it's just, this is why listening to other people tell their stories and of recovery and how they move through things, because sometimes just one word will trigger something, and it's like a key. It will open a door for you and you're able to see things differently. It really is changing our thinking about everything that I know personally, and I know, as you were saying, from people that I had experience with. When you get to a place where you actually just start to step back and look at things really differently, metabolically your body follows. So physiologically, like we were talking about that, the chemicals in the brain. So our thoughts are very important. If we're focusing on negative and we keep bringing up negative memories over and over and over, and the body also doesn't know the difference between an actual happening and the memory. So each time someone is thinking about a trauma or something negative, their body is actually being re-traumatized.
I see.
Is what they found. So it's like the more that we focus on anything that has happened to us that was traumatic or negative or uncomfortable or dysfunctional, we are actually immersing ourselves in that place once again. So I think it's very important. That's not to say that we want to go into denial and totally, because it's very important to bring these memories up, but not over and over. I know we've touched on this a little bit. Very important to speak with a counselor, someone you trust. Talk these memories through, because it's very important to cry as you're bringing these memories up, or feel the grief as we are bringing these memories up. But that is a release. Okay, so we want to do that once, twice, maybe. We don't want to do that over and over again. We want to grieve and move on.
Would you agree that if you release it, you shouldn't have to revisit it again?
Not always.
I mean, if you totally release it, that's the problem. We may not always let it go completely, right?
Absolutely, if we totally release it, which is why I think some people have to talk things over.
I find it interesting too, Sharon, that when we suffer, we human beings suffer, usually the first place we turn to is our body to try to fix our suffering. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, typically medicine is given to us in some form to try to heal our body, when in reality our body would probably heal best if we changed our mindset and also improved our spiritual set as well.
Exactly.
But I will say this. It sometimes is necessary, depending on the severity of trauma that I've had in my life, where I had to have a calming medication to settle me down first, so my thinking was good enough so I could start doing something constructive with it.
I understand, and I think that's very true.
Because I don't want to give people the impression that I think, or I don't believe you are either, that medicine is not necessarily is something we should ignore or that we shouldn't use.
No, medication is not always a bad thing.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I do want to stress that. I think long-term medication can be counterproductive.
And can be eliminated eventually
And
if you
can
do the
be
right work.
eliminated. And I know we've talked in the past in some of the other presentations about Finland and their model of recovery and how they, on farms, and they really don't push medication. Here, our first line of defense is
Medicine.
so medicine has its place, yes.
Yeah.
And I think when one is in the midst of a psychotic episode, say for instance, you absolutely need medication to bring you back to earth, you know, for sure. And there are also times where someone is just so stressed and has so much anxiety that the body needs to be slowed. Absolutely, I do agree with you. I do feel, and I'm not a doctor, but I do feel that we are over-medicated and over-prescribed because I think there are circumstances and situations, and I also think we're over, just so many different mood disorders. I mean, you know, the mood disorders and the mental illness, and we can speak to that a little bit down the line because there are some things I'd like to say about that, but I think we're definitely overdiagnosed. I think there are cases, young children, where they're ADHD, when in fact they're just probably normal children in their, third grade, and they're very active and hyper. And, I think as a society we do need to look at this. So, yes, I agree.
Tell me, again, my personal experience is, earlier in my life, I used to run some pretty negative tapes in my brain. The notion of these memories evolving themselves into literal videotapes in my brain often put me in states of despair or feelings of despondency or a sense of separateness from everybody else. Like, I sometimes felt like I was the only person who had these thoughts or had these ideas. When I know today that isn't true, but it took me a while to get past that. Can you speak a little bit to the idea of running these tapes, and what can we do to alter the tapes in our thinking process? Is that an idea that's viable for helping someone to get past these things?
Well, I think that's what I refer to as a train, when our thoughts and our memories become a train wreck. It is, just because someone says something does not make it so, and does not make it true. So as you're growing up, you're being told things, you're being admonished, you're being, a lot, especially if one grows up in a dysfunctional environment, those are a lot of the tapes that can bring one to despair. And I think that's what you're talking about. And then, or we can be, the opposite of that, where we're, perfectionism, where we feel we need to attain this is where we're not living our own truth always. That is where recovery comes in, and it takes time. And I mean, there isn't like one magic bullet, I don't think. There isn't like one aha moment where you say, okay, that's it, and my life is going to be great, and I get it all now, and I understand. Life is a journey. Recovery is a journey. It's a process. So there isn't any one thing. There are many things. There are many tools, as we've spoken of. And as you were sharing when you were young, I mean, I also can, speak to that, and I think we all do, because I think that's what life is. I think life is, like I said, a journey, and it's a learning process, and it's kind of unfortunate that generally it takes us to be this age for it to kind of all come together and be clear, and it's almost like you spend 20, 30 years kind of, putting things in perspective from, I don't know too many people who I think, right out of the gate get it, or understand life completely. So it's actually pretty fascinating. So if we can look at life that way, if we can look at life as being fascinating, and that everything, not missing the moments, everything is a learning. What am I learning from this? It's like we're in school. And so it really can be pretty interesting, even with all of the drawbacks and the sadness. And it is, again, how we look at things, I think, our perspective. I can remember there were times, too, where I didn't have the tools that I have today, and something would send me into a tailspin, as you were saying. Now that doesn't happen, very rarely.
Mm-hmm.
And if I do get there, I get out of it pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not saying that everything is just all, peaches and cream once you get all this. Nothing is perfect, for sure. But it certainly softens things and makes life's journey a little easier, I think. And it's very important to listen to other people. That takes us out of our own thoughts.
That's very true. We need to leave ourselves.
Yeah.
I once heard a remark by someone that probably one of the most dangerous neighborhoods to enter
Is your own.
is the neighborhood of ourselves.
Your own mind.
When we are in a downcast condition, when we're uplifted and we're happy and joyful, then being in that neighborhood is okay, and it's it feels good, and it's a good, nice place to be. But when you're unhappy or you're troubled by some pain of some sort, to wander by yourself in that neighborhood is not a good place to be. And I like the idea that you bring out here, that those who recover from this type of stress or this type of memory impact, negative impact, are those who turn away from themselves and look outside of themselves for someone to share it with, even if it's just to unload it upon someone else who can't really do anything except listen.
Exactly.
But also there's the notion of not letting it always be ourselves who are talking to us. The you put it, the auto-suggestion from ourselves, it can be totally destructive to us. It's because it's that tape again. It's that repeated, you're bad, you're not doing okay, you're down, look at the world's against you, all these different garbage pieces that come into our head.
We can beat ourselves up pretty severely, and that's why isolation is not a good thing. It's really important. That's why 12-step programs, I know we've talked about this before, work, because it's kind of like reintegrating yourself into a new kind of a family. A lot of people say, oh, they became my family. Well, 12-step programs, whether one uses them a lot or from time to time, are very helpful, because you're socially getting out, you're listening to other people's stories, you're realizing that you're not alone, and actually that's one of the drawbacks to, we think we're the only ones in the world that are experiencing these things. When you get out and you realize that everyone, is experiencing something that is difficult or uncomfortable, you realize that, okay, that kind of right yourself sets you free a bit, because you're not listening to those tapes of what's wrong with me, why is this happening or whatever. Which brings me to something very interesting. Was there something else you wanted to add to that? Because I had something that I wanted to address, which I think is very fascinating.
I'd like to hear what you have to say.
There was, regarding mental illness and mood disorders, there is a woman last year who wrote a book. Now, this is something that's very new in the medical field. It's something that they're just beginning to look at and understand regarding mental illness. Her name was Suzanne Cahalan or Callahan. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right, but she wrote a book called Brain on Fire. What happened was, she was a journalist. She was very active, very successful in New York, and all of a sudden she started having anxiety, panic, paranoia, and she had a psychotic episode, a psychotic break, so she was hospitalized. So they weren't sure what happened to her. Have you heard of this book?
I have not. Nope. So please go on.
So they weren't sure what happened to her, and she went through all kinds of tests. She saw 10 doctors, and finally, the 10th or 11th doctor came in to see her. She had been through MRIs and all the normal tests that they do, to diagnose maybe what was going on with her. So she was diagnosed tentatively in the beginning with maybe manic depressive, schizophrenia, bipolar. They weren't sure what, in fact, she was dealing with.
Any label they could find to put on.
Any label they could find, and she was termed mentally ill. So they were trying to find out what triggered it and what was happening. So this one doctor, towards the end, one of the last doctors that she saw said, you know, he said, I want to do some testing. I want to do a spinal tap, and I want to do a brain biopsy because I think your brain is on fire. I think your brain is inflamed. And he said, and I want to find out if this is true. He had had some information about some other cases, and so without going into complete detail, I read the book, and it was very fascinating. So they did that. They did the spinal tap and the brain biopsy, and it came back that she indeed had an autoimmune disease. She had encephalitis of the brain, which is not discovered right away. Now that brings me to question and wonder, how many times when someone is termed mentally ill and is diagnosed with one of these mood disorders or a mental illness, perhaps is dealing with the same thing, and she alludes to that as well, which is why I've always felt that our brains could heal, given the right circumstances and the right environment and the right healing process. What the cure for her was to kind of bring everything into a nutshell here and kind of just bring, without, was steroids, epileptic medication, and some other medications. And it took time, it took months, and I think a couple of years for her to finally come back to her true self, where she was, now she is successful and she speaks on this now. She travels around and speaks on this. So I've always felt that because of the way our society looks at things, and because we are over-medicated, over-diagnosed, over everything, that we're really not getting to the crux of a lot of things. And years ago, when someone was mentally ill or it was said that they were either possessed or they were put in mental institutions for a lifetime, when perhaps, maybe, this in fact is what they were dealing with too. So they have discovered many other cases since this woman that were diagnosed as schizophrenic, manic depressive, bipolar, and they also had this encephalitis. And there was also another very interesting thing, physiologically, that some of these women that had this episode of an encephalitis on the brain, the inflammation, also had a tumor in their ovaries. And I forget what they call it. It was a particular tumor, but not always, not everyone. And the men also had other things going on sometimes in their body that wasn't discovered. There was some kind of a tumor which was causing a metabolic imbalance. Now, isn't that fascinating?
It is. It's very fascinating.
And that tells you. So who's to say that even, as I said, I'm not a doctor, but discussing Alzheimer's and dementia, who's to say, because I know that they have, they still don't know as far as Alzheimer's and dementia. I cannot speak to that really, other than to say that I know there's still a lot we do not know, although they are making strides. And one thing they do know is that in Alzheimer's patients' autopsies, there's a lot of damage to the frontal lobe. The frontal cortex, where memory is. The strands are all gummed up and receptors do not work correctly.
Yeah, and there's a lot of inflammation in that area as
And
well.
there's a lot of inflammation in that area. So they're still trying to understand the causes. Is it genetic, environmental, or some other event, or combination of all of the above? So while I cannot address this at length, I can speak, as I said, about that woman and her illness that she had, which I think is just fascinating. And there were a few other notes.
Another point, a point I would add to your comment about this book and the story of this woman, it's interesting to me that she did not give up and continued to go to one doctor after another, which tells me, again, sometimes people stop too soon with the pursuit of what is best for them.
And why is that? Do you know what she says in her book?
No, tell me.
She said a lot of people go undiscovered, and she said, I was very, very fortunate that this was discovered. And she said, I was also very fortunate that I came from a family that was able to pay. It cost over $1 million, she said, for them to discover
$1 million?
all the yes.
Wow.
She said, and she said to have all the tests that needed to be done,
Mm-hmm.
to see all the specialists that she needed to see. The average person on insurance are not going to do that. They're going to say, you saw Dr. So-and-so and they found it was undiagnosed and or whatever, they've diagnosed you with this, so that's it. They're not going to pay. So in our country, you're right, very fortunate that she was able to see doctor after doctor after doctor. And her father was a doctor or a psychiatrist, I'm trying to remember, but he would not accept that his daughter was mentally ill. He always thought it was something physically. So he's the one who insisted, because he knew this vibrant young woman, she was in her 20s, one month, and then the next month she was almost catatonic. And some people, when this happens to them, they can go into comas, and they have epileptic seizures sometimes down the line, go into comas, and some people die because the brain, if it's not treated, because there was also antibiotics that she was treated with towards the end or in the beginning or whatever. But I find that very fascinating. I find that to be proof that we are very resilient and that our bodies are amazing, and the brain and the mind is incredible. And I think that given the opportunity, our bodies and our mind can heal no matter what has happened. Even, like I say, in Finland, even people with brain injuries have healed and come back. So I think we have that potential, and I think that too often it's squashed, and we're not given the proper environment or treatment or whatever. Again, I think that has to do with over-prescribing, over-diagnosis.
In a conclusion statement, I would simply say that the idea of how important our memory is, whether our brain is working properly or improperly, came through clearly today in your presentation. It is a tool and also a bank of information that helps us or hinders us, depending upon how it's used or how it comes to bear upon our life at any given time. So the encouragement, I guess, for us today as we leave is don't run away from our memories, but also be conscious about the nature of our memories in order to keep ourselves healthy. And to use others to help us frame the right memories so that we do not suffer from painful memories.
Right, and we can, in effect, we can rewrite our stories with new memories.
Exactly, and we'll leave it there because that's a great place to close. We rewrite our stories by creating new memories. And that breaks those bad tapes that run in our brain on a regular basis. So again, Sharon, thank you so much for sharing with us today and bringing this information to us. I know that others out there in TLC staff will certainly appreciate this when they get the opportunity to see it.
Thank you.